It was one of the first instant recommendations for people starting podcasts in the early 2010s, the original Audio-Technica ATR2100, which led to this follow-up with better specs in 2019, the ATR2100X. But while most microphones don't necessarily age, perhaps the earlier versions of the USB and XLR mics might be a bit long in the tooth considering. So then, let's find out if this thing still pulls its weight in 2025. By the way, yes, it has been discontinued, but you can still find a lot of them on Amazon if you're interested at a pretty decent price. Now, for the build quality, I do have to do a bit of a comparison because I actually kind of find this interesting. The ATR2100 came out before the Q2U. However, the update 2100X came out in 2019, so I'm not exactly sure who copied who. But the similarities are way too many to be a coincidence. The big difference is the port on the Q2U is kind of sad for 2025, considering it's still being sold. Yes, you can get those cables, but they're not easy to track down, nor are they cheap, at least not here in Canada. The ATR2100X has USB-C, so it is a bit of a win there. But the shocking similarity is under the hood of both mics. These are the capsules. Now, they're not perfectly alike, though they are relatively unique enough looking capsules, so I'm guessing they're probably from the same distributor, and even plausibly the same capsule, with the Audio-Technica one being a bit more recent. Which I do find kind of weird. I mean, they don't even try to hide it. Now, I do find it interesting that the XLR USB form factor they started was the handheld style. And I don't know if it was due to cost, but it has definitely changed over the years as the handheld look has been handily relegated to the stage work, I think. But considering these microphones were really coming out around 14 or 15 years ago, it's still a pretty impressive showing for a build, even if the looks don't endear them to many people these days. So the sound is an interesting consideration. I didn't find the sound to be overly fantastic from this microphone, though I do think it's decently set up for people that didn't want to be adding a bunch in post. And there was a pretty good reason for that. Back in 2011, there was no companion app or onboard DSP. That stuff was wildly out of reach back then, even so in 2019 when this was released with the MV7 from Shure still in the planning stages at that time. And to be honest, if I recall, the initial MV7 was kind of pretty light on the DSP as well, but it really doesn't even compare, even when you're looking at that original MV7, because there was no such intervention with these initial USB and XLR combo mics. That all said though, I again don't mind the sound out of the ATR2100X. For certain uses, this mic may very well be a decent fit even now, though I think it does kind of get outclassed these days. Even some of the super cheap options come with some sort of processing, which I think is a good time to dip into the next chapter. And this is kind of where the wheels come off. While you really have to hand it to Audio-Technica for one of the best concepts from the 2010s, the lack of push from companies kind of handed the market away. While companies like Audio-Technica and Samsung went to try to sell their broadcast stuff so you could look cool and pay them more money, the real juggernauts took over with Fifine and Maono, really swamping the market with very basic designs that not only get the job done, but also tend to fit in with the video aesthetic these days. And a lot of the success of the super cheap options comes from the expanding and improving market on the components for what I call e-waste manufacturers. And while the QA is strongly lacking in a lot of these new products from those companies, they're producing relatively decent products at prices that completely shut down a lot of those early grabs by companies for what they were calling broadcast mics, especially at the price these mics were being offered at, which might not be a bad thing. I mean, if you're going to get a completely forgettable sounding mic, might as well be as cheap as possible, right? I mean, sure. If you were to pick up one of these ATR2100Xs for a new project, I doubt anyone's really going to notice or care, though you might get some weird looks on video. I think this is a hard pill to swallow these days with all the uber cheap options that are coming out with the constantly emerging companies. Again, though, that QA issue is a consistent issue for the cheaper brands. Meaning, if you're doing anything that just needs a mic in front of you, like an online prof or just presenting for your job, maybe skip the mono and just pick something like this up. Though if you do want to be a bit more current, there are much better options out there from companies like Rode and Shure that will perform a lot better and for sure may be less of an eyesore. And those options do come with more up-to-date processing that just might be exactly what you're looking for, especially if sound quality is at the top of your list. One thing is for sure though, definite props need to go to Audio-Technica for paving the way for good and cheap audio, as well as them being smart enough to recognize the need to upgrade that mic as we got into the big podcast push of 2020. While these mics might not be at the top of everyone's wish list anymore, they did set the standard for what was to come and really paved the way for those super cheap options that people now have. Maybe that's a bad thing? I'm not sure yet. But while companies chuck these things into the discontinued pile, remember, they still have a purpose and can be used. And not everyone wants the empty flash of RGB and needs something reliable. What do you think though? Let me know down below. Cheers guys, and thanks for watching.